Good day. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you for Reason to Resist on February 25th, 2025. I'm very pleased to be joined this evening by author and activist Yves Engler. I'm in Athens, Greece. Yves is in Montreal. For those few of you who may not be familiar with Yves, Yves and I have worked on numerous occasions, and this is in the interest of full disclosure, on various types of disruptions, activist activity and journalistic activity in the past. And the reason why I've invited Yves onto this program this evening, we've talked about a lot of subjects over the years, Yves and I, but the immediate purpose in my having Yves on the program this evening is this extraordinary series of events that happened over the past week or so in Montreal involving Yves' arrest, fundamentally for criticizing a fanatical lunatic Zionist who is also in Montreal by the name of Dahlia Kurtz. Yves, thank you for joining me this evening.
Thanks for having me.
So, Yves, I want to sort of break this down step by step. I think it's important for people to understand how this all unfolded. First of all, what can you tell us about what is your understanding of who Dahlia Kurtz is, and what kind of interactions did you have with her prior to you being contacted by Montreal police?
Yeah, I think Kurtz is how I've come to know her is as a prominent anti-Palestinian, I would say extreme Zionist on X. And over the past year or so, she sort of popped up in my feed as someone saying all kinds of wildly anti-Palestinian things. I understand that she has some corporate media background. She worked at some radio station, I think some sort of corporate radio station at some point. She announces some book on her. She's written a book of some sort that she's selling on her X or wherever page I've seen. And I've basically just responded to her dozens of occasions online. On X to her racist posts, and I've referred to her as a fascist, and I've referred to her as racist Dahlia and genocide Dahlia and all kinds of sort of snarky kind of names. Mm-hmm. And yeah, she's an extremist. She's promotes neo-Nazi groups. This one incident 2 months ago in London, Ontario. Calling for mass deportations and stuff like that. And she's a hardline anti-Palestinian.
And my understanding is that you never followed her on social media, but that her content, for some bizarre reason, was appearing in your X feed. Is that fair?
Yeah, I've never followed her. I've never communicated with her in any way. I've never met her in person. And, I respond to lots of Zionists online. I've been doing that a lot, aggressively past 16 months. And I think how the algorithm works is that when you do that and when it leads to sort of Twitter debates, Twitter likes that. And so they keep kind of, shoving her feed, into my, to what I see. And I've never followed her. Now, she, about 7 months ago, she does this pronouncement. She quote tweets me from something I'd written a week earlier criticizing her. She quote tweets me and says something to the effect of, "You are harassing me. I feel intimidated. Stop now. This is your one and only warning." Something to that effect. You can find
happened about 7 months ago.
Yeah, I believe it was July 5th.
Okay, and this warning was communicated to you by her on X. Is that right?
On X by quote tweeting me.
Right.
And as someone said at the time, responded to her, said, if you don't want him to be able to respond to what you're posting, there's a very simple way of dealing with that: block him. And I've been blocked by dozens of prominent, Sija, Jeremy Levy, Mitch Garber, many different prominent Zionists have blocked me over the past year or 2 years or whenever. And so she didn't do that. I responded to her threat online by saying something to the effect of, this is your final warning. Stop supporting the Holocaust in Gaza, or some, kind of threatening in the same kind of way she was threatening to me, whatever. This like
Yeah, but
joke.
you were threatening her in any kind of physical way at all,
No, of
right?
course, of course,
You
of
were just
course,
mocking her, threatening you.
exactly. And
Right.
and
Right.
and I've continued doing the variations of that over the past 6 or 7 months. In the evidence the Crown put forward, they say this started back in March of 2024, suggesting that my first reaction to one of her tweets was back in March 2024. I don't know. I know it's been a while, but not. I wasn't aware of going back that long.
So, Yves, I just, before we move on, I have to say that I've had a very similar experience to you on social media, particularly X and Facebook. I have found over the past year that my feed has been inundated with pro-Israel, radically pro-Israel commentary, oftentimes very offensive anti-Palestinian commentary, coming from people with significant followings on these media platforms that I don't follow. I don't want to follow. I have no interest in reading their garbage, and I actually have to, take measures to get that stuff out of my feed. I discovered how to do this because I was getting so much of this nonsense in my feed. Apparently, if you click uh, on there's a way to actually indicate to X or Facebook that the particular content you're seeing is something you're not interested in. And then that ends up, I figured out how to do this because I was getting so much of the Zionist insanity. I ended up figuring out how to reduce the incidence of that, but I still get far more of it than I want. And as I say, these are people that I have no interest in following. So I've had a very similar experience to you. I think it's important. I suspect there are other people out there who've had this experience as well. In any case, Yves, before we move on and talk about exactly what happened with the cops, there's one other thing I wanted, some background information I want to nail down with you, and that is you've learned that in this whole affair, this Dahlia Kurtz character is represented by the lawyer, a lawyer by the name of Neil Oberman, right? So, just could you tell us first of all, how do you know that Neil Oberman is representing Dahlia Kurtz in all of this?
Well, the police investigator said it initially, and then the Crown lawyer at court on Monday made that clear that there was actually a case opened by the Montreal police when Dahlia went to them with a complaint against me, and then that case was closed, and then this lawyer Neil Oberman intervened, and that reopened the case, and then ultimately led to charges. Neil Oberman is become kind of like the most prominent lawyer in Montreal in pursuing what would be called lawfare, using legal measures against those criticizing Israel's genocide. And I think it's into the dozens of different suits that he's launched. But the one that was the highest profile was against the student encampment at McGill, I think at the end of April. And he tried to get this injunction that would have banned demonstrations. I believe it was 200 meters. It could have been as much as 500 meters, but I believe it was 200 meters uh, from any McGill building. And McGill has buildings all across downtown Montreal. So it could have effectively banned like all demonstrations, not just Palestine demonstrations, like all demonstrations in big swath of downtown Montreal. Fortunately, the judge rejected that, but Oberman kind of became quite high profile around that
Mhm.
function. And like I said, he's running for the Conservative Party in the West Island riding, and he's running against Anthony Housefather, who is the most pro-Zionist Liberal MP, and he's running as the real defender of Israel's genocide. Anthony Housefather is a sellout, and Neil Oberman's the real anti-Palestinian candidate. So this is a fairly high-profile individual that's obviously taking very extreme anti-Palestinian positions.
Right. Just so our audience knows how much of a Zionist nutbar Anthony Housefather is, this person who's apparently not Zionist enough for Neil Oberman. In 2018, I think it was, Yves, Tarek Loubani, a Canadian Palestinian doctor, was shot by an Israeli sniper while he was in Gaza during the Great March of Return. And he was wearing medical garb and was in the field strictly for the purpose of treating Palestinians who were being maimed and killed by Israeli snipers during this peaceful protest. And Justin Trudeau, on was one of the rare occasions when he said something truly critical of Israel, put out a statement condemning the shooting of this Canadian Palestinian doctor by an Israeli sniper. And Anthony Housefather, along with another Liberal MP by the name of Michael Levitt, who is now the CEO of the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center and is constantly putting out insanely pro-Israel propaganda from that organization, they put out a statement distancing themselves from the prime minister, who was the leader of their own political party, and sort of gently chastising him because he had the temerity to criticize the Israeli military for shooting a Canadian citizen who's a doctor. So this is who Housefather is, and Neil Oberman appears to believe that Housefather isn't Zionist enough. Now, you've had an interaction with Oberman at the Montreal courthouse. I think it was in the connection of this encampment issue around McGill University, right?
Yeah, during the legal proceedings around his bid to ban protests, saw him at the courthouse, and I asked, I think something to the effect of, is 15,000 Palestinian children killed is not enough, and sort of asked him if, if he would, criticize what Israel was doing. And he, of course, didn't. And I actually had another, I challenged him maybe 3 or 4 months ago at a different event that I kind of came upon him. Again, similar kind of thing. So he's he had me on his radar going back a while. Obviously, it's within pro-Israel circles, I've challenged many of these different figures, and I would have been on their radar for quite some time. So I presume Oberman, in his sort of lawfare kind of efforts, had been thinking of targeting me in some way or another, and I don't exactly know how the Kurtz angle came up, but I think that if you look at someone like Anthony Housefather wouldn't want to try to go after me for harassment because he's a sitting politician. He's a man. Same thing with someone like Jeremy Levy. This mayor of Hampstead.
The mayor, just so people know, he's the mayor of Hampstead, Quebec, which is essentially a suburb of Montreal, right?
It's a suburb of Montreal, and he's a crazy pro-Israel, or many other politicians.
This is the guy, by the way, just so you know, everyone. Again, people don't know this background necessarily. Jeremy Levy told Yves in a face-to-face encounter that essentially there was no number of Palestinian children being killed by Israel that would be too much for him. Is that right, Yves?
He said explicitly, I asked him if 100,000 Palestinian children were killed, if that was too many, and he said no, good needs to prevail over evil. So you could kill 100,000 Palestinian children, and you were still the forces of good, and right. Someone else was the forces of evil.
One other thing I want to say about Oberman before you go on, on his website, Oberman describes himself as a civil litigator. He doesn't say anything about having a practice in the area of criminal law. Now, there's no impediment to people who specialize in civil matters occasionally, dabbling in criminal matters. It's not like they are prohibited from doing that professionally, but this is not his normal activity, criminal law. I think another indication that this is really just his own personal mission to engage in lawfare in any way possible against people who criticize Israel in Quebec. In any event, anything else you want to add about Oberman, Yves, before we talk about what happened during the past week?
No, just that he's running for the Conservatives, and the Conservatives claim to be about. They claim to uphold free speech, and he, of course, is incredibly hostile to free speech.
That's quite clear. Now, why don't we start from the beginning of this whole sorry, embarrassing episode for the Canadian so-called justice system? You got a call last week that started the ball rolling from an officer at Montreal Police. Could you explain to us what happened at the day, at the very on that day, at the very outset of this whole affair?
Yeah, so early on Tuesday, I received a phone call from an enquêteur, an investigator of the Montreal Police, and was told that she wanted me to come in the next day because she was going to be charging me with harassing Dahlia Kurtz. I responded incredulously and kind of had a back and forth with the police officer for a little while. She said it would take 15 minutes. You'd just be arrested, and then sort of the case would move on. She mentioned conditions, but didn't really get into any details, that I'd have to sign some conditions. And I said, well, I'm going to get my lawyer to contact you to get more information. And my lawyer, John Philpott, did that. And in that conversation, the police officer said that there would be this condition saying that I couldn't mention Dahlia Kurtz and I couldn't essentially talk about the case. And right away, I of course, was very hostile to that idea. In fact, my initial concern for a condition was not that. It was a different condition, which was just sort of some sort of general keeping the peace condition, which, because I do lots of going into press conferences and trying to ask politicians difficult questions, sometimes the police kind of are in positions where they could try to charge me for something. And I obviously don't want to have some condition that would make it easier for them to sort of get me. So I didn't want to have any condition of any sort, but specifically this idea of breaching the peace, which is, I think, common. And but they didn't bring that condition up. They brought up this condition about restricting what I could say about Dahlia and about the case. And so I then immediately, just basically after talking to my lawyer, I went public. I wrote a story about it. I invited people to say that the police investigator should drop the charges, and it went pretty viral. And ultimately, thousands of people emailed the Montreal Police saying drop these charges. And then the next day, I get a phone call. So I was supposed to go in, and I left a message early in the morning saying I needed more time to figure out coming in to be arrested for the Dahlia Kurtz alleged harassment. And I called the investigators, left a message. She didn't pick up. She didn't get back until after the time. Finally, my lawyer called her, and she was very hostile at this point. And then about an hour later, around noon on a Wednesday, I get a call from a different police investigator and saying that now they've decided to put 4 new charges against me: harassment, harassing communication, intimidation, and obstruction of justice towards the police officer. So now basically saying, because I wrote about the charges that they were bringing against me for criticizing Dahlia Kurtz, they were now saying, they claimed that was harassment, and now they were saying writing about this was harassment of the police, essentially. And they then the investigator who called me was quite clear. They're not just gonna let me go. They wanted me to come in the next morning and arrest me, but they weren't just gonna let me go like they had said the day before they would, with some conditions. Now they wanted to bring me before a judge, and they wanted to have the Crown force conditions on me, which, as I understand it, makes it a bit more of a strenuous kind of affair, a little bit more strengthens it legally and whatnot. And okay. So, yeah.
Sorry, before we move on, I want to be very clear about this. You never threatened Dahlia Kurtz with violence of any kind. Is that fair?
I've never threatened her. I've never emailed her, messaged her, seen her.
Right.
Don't follow her on X even.
before we move on, Eve, I just want to give people a flavor of what this character Dahlia Kurtz is posting on her Twitter feed. One of her more recent posts from February 24th, so that would be Monday of this week. Um, she attaches a video clip of people protesting. It looks like it's in Montreal. And in this video clip, it's a 17-second clip. There's no violence at all. She's quoting in her comment on the video the words intifada, intifada. She's put them in quotation marks with exclamations after them. And then she goes on and she says, "You'd almost think it was legal in Canada to call for mass rape, mass murder, and all around terror. On a scale of 1 to 10, how sick of this are you?" Now, first of all, even if you disagree, please let me know. There's no evidence that mass rape occurred on October 7th. I think she's quite clearly referring to October 7th. Secondly, the word intifada simply means in Arabic shaking off. She's clearly implying there that anybody who uses the word intifada is advocating for mass rape, mass murder, and all around terror, even though it simply means shaking off. And then she goes on, as I said, to say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how sick of this are you? She's obviously trying to generate hostility towards people who are peacefully protesting, hostility amongst her fellow Canadians against people who are peacefully protesting uh, in support of the victims of a genocide. And the other thing I should mention is that this particular tweet got 2,500 likes and almost 800 reposts and almost 50,000 views, since February 24th. So this is a person, and I checked her X feed after I learned of what happened to you, Eve, and it is just an unrelenting torrent of anti-Palestinian hatred. That's all it is. And hatred of those who support the Palestinians. Occasionally, she doesn't express hatred of Palestinians, but when she does that, it's, pouring love and affection on the state of Israel, which is committing a genocide. It's all Israel and Palestine all the time. She never says anything good about Palestinians. It's always bad. And she never says anything critical about Israel. It's always good, even though Israel is committing genocide before the eyes of the world and a whole range of other war crimes and crimes against humanity. That's who Dahlia Kurtz is. That's what she spends her time doing. And I think people need to understand why you reacted critically and why it's so important that people like you be permitted to criticize people like Dahlia Kurtz. In any event, Yves, um, I want to clarify one thing before we talk about the arrest and your imprisonment. You've been explaining to us the conditions they were trying to get you to agree to, right? Am I correct in understanding that these conditions were conditions for you to be released from jail, but not conditions for the charges to be dropped? So it was just basically they wouldn't hold you until trial if you signed on to these conditions, but you still were potentially going to have to stand trial for these absurd charges. Is that what
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So you go to the precinct, you go down to the police station after you get the second call, where the cops have freaked out. The cops who are supposed to be protecting us from violent criminals, they freaked out because your supporters sent some letters urging them not to criminalize your speech. What happens when you get to the police station?
Well, first of all, there's a rally of about 30 people. And there's also a whole ton of cops. There's like half dozen cops, like right at the front of the sidewalk. But then, as I later see when I walk in, there's at least a dozen more cops, like a kind of uh, a van full of cops waiting. So they complete overreach in terms of, it was 30 people just standing on the sidewalk for 15, 20, I don't know, maybe 30 minutes max. So it's complete overreach from the police right there. And they, two investigators bring me in, and they do the process of making me only have one shirt, only have one pants. They do a quick interview where they, ask me questions, and I say I'm, remaining silent, and so it lasts about 2 minutes. They throw me into a detention cell, And then about 4 or 5 hours later, I appear before a judge through video, and it's just pro forma. It's the judge asks the Crown if they object to my release, and the Crown says yes, meaning that everything gets pushed off to the next day. And so then I spend another 5 hours in this detention cell that's down more or less downtown Montreal. Then I get brought out to the prison, the Bordeaux prison, and I'm imprisoned on Thursday night, and then Friday I appear before a judge again by video, and again now they're continuing to try to push this condition of restricting my ability to talk about the case, and so then everything gets pushed off until.
I'm sorry, you're refusing at this point to accede to that condition.
Exactly. From
this is why they won't let you go and they keep you in prison, because you refuse to refrain from talking about what they're doing to you in defense of Dahlia Kurtz's genocidal, racist lunacy. Is that right?
Exactly. And now, I mean, that was right from the first conversation. After they announced this condition to Philpott on the Tuesday, to my lawyer Philpott, then they that you know that's what everything is. The negotiations all around essentially that condition. I mean, they add some new charges, but it becomes all about this question. Because I say right away, I'm fine with not having any. They also want me to not mention the police investigator that they add charges on. I say right away that I'm fine with not mentioning this person. It's right. So to me, the whole thing is around Kurtz principally, but specifically, if I'm not allowed to name her, then I'm not allowed to talk about the whole case effectively. So it all becomes about that. And then, I spend the weekend in jail. And so Monday morning, I'm supposed to be at the courthouse. I should say throughout this whole time, I'm not able to talk to my lawyer. I'm not allowed to have any phone call of any sort. So on the Friday morning, when I get brought before the video judge from the prison, we have to stop the court hearing. There's 30, supporters in the court. We have to stop the court hearing so I can have my first time when I get to speak to my lawyer. And so then my lawyer later on when we go back into the court, my lawyer asks the judge to write a directive to the prison that I have the right to talk to my lawyer to prepare my defense before the court case on Monday. They absolutely refuse that. I bring it up to the guards at the prison multiple times. I end up actually almost in a big squabble with the guards on Sunday evening when they have the lockdown at 5 p.m. because now I realize I'm not gonna have any chance to prepare a defense with my lawyer before court on Monday. Now, weirdly, Monday morning comes I'm at 7:30 a.m. I go to the guards and say, basically, why haven't I been taken to the Palais de Justice? Why haven't I been taken? I'm supposed to go before court. They say, no, I'm not. You're not supposed to be today. You're supposed to be tomorrow. It looks like there's a bureaucratic error of some sort. There's towards 100 people there who are supporting me. The judge questions why isn't the prisoner been brought before them? Well, they're supposed to be early in the morning on the Monday. And I don't know exactly what transpires. I'm not there, but there's some sort of error. And suddenly the judge calls the prison demanding I get sent to the Palais de Justice, which is 45 minutes away, downtown Montreal. And suddenly there's this urgency at the prison to try to bring me down there so I can actually appear before the judge that day. So I was on the cusp of being kept in jail for at least another 24 hours, just out of prison or whatever bureaucratic kind of issues. And then
so I'm sorry, the judge calls the prison on Monday. Okay, so are you brought to the court on Monday?
Yeah,
after the judge.
Monday afternoon. I get down there probably like 1 p.m.
Okay, what happens when you get to the court?
So we appear before the judge, and the judge is trying to wrap their head around what the issue is, and basically starts with the Crown laying out the case for why this condition is necessary. We have a legal opinion that states very clearly that conditions that in harassment cases that this can't be, you can't just bring in a blanket, they can't talk about this. So there's a ruling on this, and this is around a harassment case. Reading the ruling, that was not what we would call of any political type. It would be more of, I don't know, some individual harassing their ex or something to that effect. But despite that, the ruling says no, you can't bring in some sort of blanket restriction to block those being accused from talking about the case at all. I would argue that, therefore, in my case, that would go tenfold than which is a very obviously kind of political case. But anyways, nonetheless, the Crown argues their case and for quite a while, argues their case for why this condition is necessary. And basically, by a certain way through the Crown arguing it, the judge basically stops and forces the Crown to concede that this is ridiculous, that they have to come to an agreement with my lawyer to massively narrow this condition. I was always willing to accept a condition that said, and my lawyer stated that to the police right away and then to the Crown, that I was willing to accept a condition that said I can't, when Dahlia Kurtz posts on X, that I can't respond to her, or in other words, I will just block Dahlia Kurtz myself, so I never see her stuff anymore. Which is what I've ultimately done. But that's very different than I can't talk about the case, and so essentially the Crown was forced by the judge, before our side even made their arguments, before my lawyer even made the argument against the condition, to massively restrict the scope of this, don't mention Dahlia, which basically just don't don't directly communicate with her on any social media. And so it was a win. It was like 5 days in jail, or almost 5 days in jail for I think not some earth shattering, but some minor win for free speech. And the Crown was, sort of embarrassed after all this. All obviously my supporters, who spent the whole day. People were there early in the morning, and there were well, actually, when I was released at 7 p.m., there was still 30 people there. So people spent the whole day at the courthouse, and they heard they heard the arguments. They were this Crown prosecutor was just arguing what Dahlia, this was a Twitter argument between myself and Dahlia Kurtz. And the Crown prosecutor was trying to frame it all through, she is an advocate for Jewish people. There was this whole undercurrent of, this is anti-Semitism, or this is, anti-Jewish, or this kind of dynamic was sort of, below the surface in how the Crown was making their case. But it became pretty clear right away that this was basically two people who disagree about Israel's genocide, and one of those people was, rather than block me on X, decided to turn to the policing system and judicial system to target me.
Right, the one who supports genocide didn't block you and turned to the police. That's a hell of a country we live in, Yves. Yves, before I go on, I just want to be clear about one thing. In regard to what you just explained. If I understand correctly, you were kept in prison for 5 days for nothing, because the condition you ultimately signed after the judge kind of browbeat the Crown prosecutor is the one you were willing to sign from the very beginning. So they kept you in prison for 5 days to prevent you from talking about this affair, talking about the fact that they were using the criminal laws to silence your criticism of a radical Zionist. And they lost that battle, so you were in prison for 5 days for nothing. Have I got that right?
Exactly right.
Okay. And could you tell us, what were conditions like in prison, Yves? Were you like in a jail cell by yourself? What was the food like? Did you meet people in there? What was it like in there?
Yeah, the first day you're in a detention center, downtown police station, and you're in a cell that's, you're by yourself. There's just two benches, hardwood benches. I slept on my boot. You have one shirt. They make you take off your undershirt. I had long johns on. Make you take off the long johns. One pair of pants. and and they it's terrible food. The sandwich, the police officer themselves said is dégueulasse. It's disgusting. I eat an oatmeal cookie. Eventually, I do eat one of these cheese sandwiches. That's definitely not a very good sandwich. They then late in the evening, 7 or 8 o'clock, they take you to the prison, which is about, I think, 45 minutes away, and they process you. It takes hours of waiting in these different cells. They strip search you. They make you, they kind of look up your butt. They then put me in a minimum security wing that has bunk beds that probably can handle about 25, 30 people. Initially, it was probably about 15 or 18 of us there. And so there's one side are bunk beds, other side is kind of like an area to eat, and there's a TV in that area. So there is a TV for a bit, but they lock down every so often, so you kind of get access to that area intermittently. And the food once you're in the prison is a bit better. It's I was called actual food. There's some potatoes with chicken. At one point there was actually couscous. There was a pasta dish one day. It's certainly not good food, but it's I would say passable food. But there's really nothing to do in the wing I was at. There's nothing. There's no books. There's no newspapers. There's no. I got very lucky on the Thursday night, and when I walked into this the kind of food area of this where I'm at, there was a pencil, one of those really small pencils, and I take that pencil, and at this point I didn't realize how lucky I was, and basically I'm then able to write, and I write a whole bunch over the next 4 or 5 days, and I spent about as much time trying to make the pencil workable by ripping off pieces to be able to write, and it's very hard to find paper. I have to use a bag to write on, and this and that. So I got lucky in that sense. There was a couple fights, three basic low-level fights that transpired over my time in there. Mostly it's people in distress, honestly, and you see they right away talk to you about suicide, both at the detention center and then quite aggressively at the prison. Have you had suicidal thoughts? Do you think you might have suicide? They really push that issue, which I understand, because basically they're bringing in people who are to a large extent are in kind of mental distress into an environment that's even more, mental stress inducing. And so, there was one guy, older guy, who he couldn't control himself, he couldn't control his bowels, and he just shat all over, pissed himself. Clearly, is older. This guy, there's no way. I don't know what they had him in there for. I don't know reason. This guy clearly had serious mental health. At one point, he puts on his diaper and he puts on top of his pants because he doesn't clearly understand. Homeless guy, this older homeless guy, very unhealthy. That was in our cell for a bit. Then there's some other guys who were clearly, they're in there for sort of, I think, beating their partners. What I took it, these are people who have been very much abused, who are then abusing others. That's their life experience. So personally, honestly, I felt like, though a number of them, I think basically everyone had been in prison a fair bit or somewhat, I did better than basically everyone else in there. I kind of kept to routine. They basically just tried to sleep all day, and what it looked very unhealthy to me. I tried to, kind of follow routine. I tried to, again, write. They all thought it was obviously very weird for trying to write and this kind of stuff. More or less people were nice to me, and I felt no sort of physical tension or anything like that. But it's a lot of people who are in very difficult situations mentally. I obviously wasn't in some maximum area with, I don't know, quote unquote hardened criminals. But the guards, they dehumanize. That's clear cut. They dehumanize you completely. You can come to them and explain that the judge has ordered you to be able to talk to your lawyer, and they just don't care. And they make it really clear that they are doing the absolute minimum of whatever. When I asked for like a piece of paper, not even a blank piece of paper, just one of the the formulas, the formulaire that they have to write on the other side of, and they, they'll say, oh yeah, we'll get you that. And you ask them 4 more times, they never give it to you. Things like that just seem kind of unnecessarily dehumanizing, quite frankly, not just for me, but for them. I would hate to be one of these prison guards, especially the ones working overnight and stuff like that. But it's not nice. I went outside in the almost 5 days I was there. I got a full maybe 10 seconds of fresh air because our wing, I guess, was 5-second walk kind of outside in a kind of caged area. So they don't care about any of those questions. I guess maybe when you're in for longer periods, they start being forced into some of that stuff, but they certainly didn't do any of that stuff for us.
Wow, we can only imagine what it's like when you don't know your legal rights and you're in a higher security facility. Wow, if that's the minimum security prison experience for somebody who has a good grasp of their legal rights, that's disturbing. Lastly, Yves, again, to clarify, my understanding is that these charges are still outstanding against you. All that has happened is that you've signed on to several conditions, most of which seem to be pro forma, one of which is that you're not going to communicate with this genocidal lunatic. And all that has done is liberated you for the time being from prison, but you still have these charges hanging over you, and they've given you no indication they're going to drop them at this stage. Is that right?
Exactly. So April 25th, the court process moves along.
Right. Well, I'm going to go on a limb here, Yves. I'm going to predict that they're going to drop these damn charges. And at the 11th hour, when a prosecutor is forced to make a decision about whether to try this case, and by the way, this has happened on numerous occasions during this genocide, where people who perfectly law-abiding citizens in Canada who were taking lawful actions to protest against this genocide had completely bogus charges brought against them, and at the 11th hour, they were dropped because the prosecutor was not prepared to try the case. But they left it out there. They left it hanging out there for as long as possible to cause maximum stress and intimidation to the people who were defending the rights of the Palestinian people. I predict that's going to happen here again. I hope I'm right. I'm pretty confident that I will be right. But in any event, we're going to follow this story carefully, Yves, and please do keep us updated.
Thanks. Yeah, I hope likewise, but we will see.
And this is Dimitri Lascaris signing off from Athens, Greece on February 25th, 2025.